Jacob Turner began his morning like he always did, rising before the sun and stepping outside into the cool air of the Arizona frontier. The land stretched wide and quiet around him, the sky still pale with the last touch of night. His ranch stood alone between the canyon and the open plains, a place where a man could work hard, breathe freely, and hear nothing but the wind moving across the dry ground. Jacob enjoyed these early hours more than anything. They felt peaceful, gentle, and honest. He saddled his horse, Redwind, patting the animal's strong neck before setting out to check on his cattle. The herd had been wandering lately, probably searching for patches of grass after several dry weeks. Jacob guided Redwind toward the canyon's edge, where the land dipped sharply and shadows clung to the rocks. As he rode, he scanned the horizon. Everything looked normal at first. The sun was slowly rising, spreading orange light across the plains. A few birds circled far above, and the distant shapes of his cattle moved slowly near a ridge. It felt like an ordinary day, and Jacob expected nothing unusual. But then something caught his eye near a cluster of mesquite trees close to the canyon. At first, he thought it was just a piece of cloth caught on a branch, but as he got closer, a strange unease filled his chest. The shape was too large, too still, too human. He urged Redwind forward. As he approached, his breath caught. A tall, young Apache girl hung from a tree, her feet barely touching the ground, her hair falling across her face. The sight shocked him, not in a violent way, but in a way that made his heart feel heavy and tight. She was clearly alive, though very weak, her chest rising just enough to show she was still breathing. Jacob's first thought was confusion. How had she ended up here? Why was she alone? His second thought was simple and clear. She needed help. Right now. Whatever had happened, whoever had done this, none of it mattered in that moment. She was a person, and she needed someone to act. He quickly got down from his horse. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from worry. He reached up and gently supported her weight, making sure she could breathe more easily. Then he cut the rope with his pocket knife. Her body slumped forward, heavier than he expected, but he caught her carefully and lowered her to the ground. She was tall, much taller than most people he had ever met. Her clothes were worn from travel, and she had beads woven into her long, dark hair. There were no signs of harm besides exhaustion and the pressure around her neck. She looked young, maybe not fully grown, but old enough to speak and understand. Jacob checked her breathing again. Her pulse was slow but steady. She needed water and rest. He looked around, hoping there might be someone who had stayed behind. But there was no one in sight. The land was empty and silent. He hesitated only for a moment. Taking an Apache girl to his ranch could cause trouble with both settlers and the tribe. People often misunderstood each other. One wrong action, one wrong word, and tension could rise quickly between communities. But Jacob never measured decisions through fear. If somebody needed help, he helped. He lifted the girl gently and placed her across Redwind's back, supporting her so she wouldn't fall. Redwind stayed calm, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Jacob mounted behind the girl, holding her steady with one arm as he guided the horse home. The ride felt longer than usual. Jacob kept checking if she was breathing. Every small breath she took made him feel relieved. The sun rose higher, warming the land. And by the time he reached his ranch, sweat had formed across his forehead, not from heat, but from worry. He carried the girl into the barn, choosing a soft pile of hay covered with clean blankets. The barn felt safe, warm, and private. Jacob fetched a bucket of water from the well, a cloth to cool her forehead, and the softest blanket he could find. He placed everything beside her and knelt quietly. Gently, he lifted her head and helped her drink a little water. She swallowed weakly, her eyelids fluttering. Jacob wiped her face with the cool cloth and spoke softly, even though he wasn't sure she understood his language. "You're safe here. Just rest. No one will harm you." She didn't answer, but her breathing became slower and more even, as if she felt the calm in his voice. Jacob stayed beside her for a while, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the rustling hay, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft snorts of the horses. Everything felt strangely peaceful, even though he knew the situation was serious. After some time, the girl stirred. Her eyes opened just a little. She looked around the barn, confused and fearful at first, her gaze darting to the door and then back to him. Jacob raised both hands gently to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said in a soft tone. "You're safe. You were hurt, and I brought you here." She watched him with wide, tired eyes. Her breathing sped up for a moment, but then she seemed to recognize the kindness in his expression. Slowly, she relaxed again, though still uncertain. Jacob didn't move closer. He gave her space, staying a few steps away so she wouldn't feel trapped. After a minute, she raised her hand slightly, as if asking for water. Jacob understood immediately and brought the bucket closer, letting her drink a few small sips before she drifted into sleep again. Throughout the day, he checked on her often. He made sure she had shade, water, and quiet. Every time she woke, she seemed a little more aware, a little less afraid. She never spoke, but her eyes followed him, watching his movements carefully. Jacob felt a strange mix of responsibility and protectiveness growing inside him. He didn't know who she was, why she had been alone, or what events had led to this moment. But he knew he couldn't turn away from her. As the sun began to set, casting warm golden light through the barn's wooden slats, Jacob brought her a small bowl of soft food. She ate slowly, her hands still trembling. After she finished, she looked at him for a long moment, as if studying his face. Then she placed her hand over her heart, quietly, gently. Jacob didn't know the meaning at first, but something about the gesture felt sincere and grateful. He nodded in return, offering a small smile. The night grew darker and colder. Jacob covered her with another blanket and made a small fire outside the barn door to keep watch. He didn't know what dangers might come, perhaps settlers searching for someone they believed guilty, or Apache warriors looking for one of their own. But he stayed alert, listening to every sound. As the stars filled the sky, Jacob realized something important. His simple act of kindness might change his life in ways he could not yet imagine. He had stepped into a story larger than himself, one that involved two worlds that often misunderstood each other. And all of it began with one moment of compassion in a quiet morning light. The girl slept peacefully through the night, breathing softly, safe for the first time since her ordeal began. Jacob sat nearby, calm and steady, determined to protect her until she could stand on her own again. He didn't know her name, he didn't know her story, but he knew that tomorrow would bring answers and possibly challenges. Yet, none of that mattered, right now. What mattered was that he had saved a life, and the quiet peace of his ranch had become a shelter for someone who desperately needed it. Through the night, Jacob stayed close to the barn, never letting his guard down. The stars slowly faded, and the first touch of morning light spread across the sky. The ranch was quiet as always, but Jacob felt a new kind of energy around him, as if the land itself knew someone unexpected had taken shelter there. He stood up slowly, stretching his tired limbs, and then walked inside the barn to check on the girl he had rescued. She was awake. Her eyes, dark and alert, followed him the moment he stepped in. She looked stronger than yesterday, though still weak. The blankets covered her gently, and she held the edge of one, as if it offered comfort. Jacob approached carefully, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle her. Her gaze stayed sharp, watching every step he took. Jacob gave a warm, quiet smile. "Good morning," he said softly, unsure if she understood his language. He pointed toward the small bucket of fresh water he had brought earlier. Water? The girl blinked once, then nodded slowly. Jacob lifted the bucket and brought it close. She accepted it with both hands and drank in small sips, her throat still sore. Jacob waited patiently. When she finished, she looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She tried to speak, but only a faint sound came out, too soft to understand. Jacob shook his head gently. "It's all right," he said in a calm voice. "You don't have to talk yet." She lowered her eyes, almost ashamed she couldn't speak clearly. Jacob knelt down at a distance that felt respectful and safe. He didn't want her to feel trapped. The morning sun entered through the barn slats, drawing lines of gold across the floor. Tiny specks of dust floated gently in the warm beams. A few minutes passed in silence before she finally gathered the strength to try again. Her voice was soft, hoarse, but still clear enough for him to hear this time. "Nayeli." Jacob tilted his head. "Your name?" She nodded. "Nayeli." He repeated it carefully so he wouldn't mispronounce it. "Nayeli, that's a beautiful name." The girl lowered her gaze again, but this time shyly, not fearfully. Jacob waited, sensing she wanted to say more. She took a slow breath, touching her throat lightly, as if remembering the pain from before. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice held emotion. Not dramatic, but sincere. A simple gratitude, offered with all the strength she could gather. Jacob shook his head gently. "You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have helped you." But Nayeli shook her head softly, disagreeing. She knew not everyone would have stopped to help her. She knew the land held tension between her people and settlers. She knew many would have walked away in fear or anger. But this man had acted without hesitation. She rested back on the hay, still tired. Jacob brought her a small bowl of warm broth he had prepared earlier. When he handed it to her, she held it with trembling hands. But she managed to drink it slowly. Food brought life back to her cheeks, and her eyes gained a bit more brightness. After eating, she looked outside through a small opening in the barn wall. Her expression became thoughtful, almost worried. Jacob followed her gaze and understood immediately. She was wondering if her people were searching for her. Jacob sat quietly before speaking. "Your family? They might be looking for you." He kept his tone open, not wanting to assume too much. "Do you want to go back to them? I can help you when you're strong again." Nayeli hesitated. She wrapped her blanket a little tighter around herself, as if she remembered something painful. Then she finally looked at him and whispered, "They think I am gone." Jacob's heart tightened. He understood what she meant. Whoever had harmed her must have left her believing she wouldn't survive. And her people, finding no trace, might have assumed the worst. He didn't press her for details. She wasn't ready to talk about everything yet. Outside, the ranch began to wake up. The cattle moved across the field, and Redwind snorted softly, ready for the day. Jacob stepped out to check on the animals, leaving the barn door slightly open so Nayeli wouldn't feel closed in. While tending to his chores, Jacob kept thinking about her situation. Helping her felt like the right thing to do, but he couldn't ignore the dangers. If settlers discovered she was at his ranch, they might misunderstand and assume he had taken her or was helping someone they believed guilty. And if Apache warriors came searching, they might see Jacob as responsible, until Nayeli herself explained. Still, he didn't regret saving her for even a second. After finishing his chores, he returned to the barn. Nayeli was sitting up slightly now, propped against a bale of hay. Her posture was cautious, but less tense. She watched him enter, her expression calmer than before. Jacob sat at a respectful distance. "If you feel strong enough," he began gently, "you can tell me what happened. Only if you want to." She took a long breath. The memory was difficult, but she trusted him enough to speak. Her voice trembled at first, not from fear, but from exhaustion. "I was traveling alone," she whispered, "close to the settlers' road. I went to look for herbs. Someone saw me. They thought I was stealing. She paused, struggling for words. I ran. They followed. Jacob listened quietly, his expression steady and patient. They caught me near the canyon. They didn't listen. I did not take anything. Her voice grew faint from strain. They left me there, thinking no one would find me. Jacob felt a soft ache inside his chest. Not anger, not hatred, just sadness at the unfairness. He didn't interrupt. He let her speak until she stopped. Nayeli took another breath and added quietly, "If you did not come, I would not be here." Jacob nodded slowly. "I'm glad I came when I did." For the first time, Nayeli offered him a small, fragile smile. It wasn't a happy smile, but a grateful one. They sat in quiet peace for a while. The wind moved gently through the barn, carrying the scent of dust and hay. Jacob could tell she was getting stronger little by little, but her legs still trembled when she tried to shift position. Her neck was sore, her voice weak, but her spirit was clearly recovering. Later in the afternoon, Jacob stepped outside to fetch more water. When he returned, he found Nayeli standing. Barely standing, but standing. She held onto the wooden beam of the barn, steadying herself. Her tall frame looked unbalanced from weakness, but her determination was clear. Jacob quickly moved forward, though not too fast so she wouldn't panic. "Careful," he said gently. "You don't have to push yourself yet." Nayeli shook her head slowly. "I must regain strength." Jacob admired her determination. She was brave, quietly brave. Not loud or fierce, but strong in a calm way. He offered his arm for support, and she accepted after a moment of hesitation. With his help, she took a few steps, her legs trembling under her weight. Each step was slow but steady, and Jacob kept pace with her. They moved around the barn slowly, helping her loosen her muscles. After a few minutes, she grew tired, and Jacob guided her back to the blankets. She sat down carefully, breathing deeply. "You're doing well," Jacob said with a warm tone. "One step at a time." Nayeli looked at him with gratitude again. She had no words to express how safe she felt near him, but her eyes said enough. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and red, Jacob sensed a change in the air. It wasn't the weather. It was something deeper, something approaching. Nayeli sensed it too. Her expression shifted, her eyes becoming alert. She looked toward the distant hills beyond the ranch, her breath catching slightly. Jacob turned his head, listening carefully. Far in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the soft sound of horse hooves. More than one, approaching slowly, steadily, purposefully. Nayeli's eyes widened. She recognized the rhythm, the pattern, the number. These were not settlers. These were Apache riders, and they were coming toward the ranch. Jacob looked at her calmly, his voice steady. "Are they your people?" Nayeli nodded once, her expression serious. She whispered, "They come. For me." The peaceful silence of the ranch prepared to shift. Tomorrow would bring confrontation or understanding, no one could predict which. But Jacob stayed calm. He had nothing to hide. And he knew this moment was the beginning of something important. The quiet evening around the ranch slowly faded into night. But Jacob already knew sleep would not come easily. The distant sound of hooves from earlier kept echoing in his mind. Something was coming, someone was coming, and it was coming straight toward his land. Nayeli sat quietly in the barn, her hands resting on her blanket, her eyes fixed on the open doorway. She wasn't shaking, but Jacob could see the tension in her posture. She wasn't afraid for herself. He could see that clearly. She was worried for him. Jacob stepped inside and crouched in front of her, speaking softly. "It's all right. I don't think they're here to harm you." She lifted her eyes slowly, uncertainty visible in their dark depths. Jacob shook his head gently. Then I'll show them I'm not. She swallowed, wanting to believe him, but knowing her, people could be very protective. The Apache rarely trusted settlers, and Jacob, though kind-hearted, was still a stranger to them. The sound of the distant horses grew clearer through the night. The rhythm was unmistakable, steady, strong, and perfectly coordinated. These were riders who knew the land well. Apache warriors always moved with purpose and confidence, not wandering like settlers often did. Jacob stood and walked outside, leaving the barn door open so Nayeli could see him. The night air was cool, and the stars above glimmered sharply against the dark sky. The ranch lay silent, almost holding its breath. Minutes later, the riders appeared over the low ridge. Torches flickered in some of their hands, creating moving lines of orange light. The group was large, more than Jacob expected. He counted at least 12 shadows riding in formation. They rode closer, and when the moonlight touched them, their faces became visible. Their features were serious, focused, and alert. The horses stopped in a single motion, dust rising from the ground around them. The man at the front dismounted first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a quiet authority. His long hair was braided, decorated with beads and feathers that caught the moonlight. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, assessing everything with one glance. Jacob didn't need to guess who he was. This was the chief. The other warriors waited silently behind him, neither threatening nor relaxed, simply watchful. Their presence alone was enough to make most settlers step back in fear. But Jacob stood steady, hands at his sides, showing calm respect. The chief walked forward slowly until he stood a few steps away from Jacob. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night wind stirred between them, carrying the smell of sagebrush and dust. Finally, the chief broke the silence. "Where is she?" His voice was deep and clear, not angry, but weighted with emotion. Jacob answered honestly. "She's safe. She's inside the barn. She's—" The chief's eyes narrowed a little, trying to measure Jacob's intentions. "You took her," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Jacob shook his head slightly. "No." The chief studied him carefully. His eyes were sharp, but not hostile. He seemed to be searching for any sign of deceit. Jacob kept his posture open and steady. He didn't try to defend himself with too many words. Truth didn't need a long explanation. From inside the barn, Nayeli heard every word. She gathered her strength and pushed herself up slowly. Her legs were still weak, but determination carried her forward. She stepped into the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame for support. When the chief saw her, his expression changed instantly. His shoulders softened. His eyes widened in recognition and deep relief. He took a single step forward, and though he didn't rush to her, the emotion in his face was unmistakable. A father had found his daughter alive. "Nayeli," he breathed. She answered softly, "Father." The warriors behind him all murmured together a sound of relief, not hostility. Some bowed their heads. Others let out quiet breaths, as if releasing worry they had been carrying for days. The chief approached her slowly, almost as if afraid she would disappear if he moved too fast. He reached out and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, checking that she was truly real, truly alive. Nayeli rested her forehead lightly against his chest, closing her eyes. Jacob stepped back respectfully, giving them space. He could feel the weight of the moment. This was not a moment for him, it was a moment for them. After a few heartbeats, the chief lifted his head and looked at Jacob again, his expression now full of a different kind of intensity. "You saved her," he said firmly. Not a question, another truth spoken aloud. Jacob nodded. "I did what anyone should do." The chief gave a slow shake of his head. "No, many would not." The warriors behind him murmured again, agreeing with their leader. Nayeli stepped forward a little, still holding onto the chief's arm. Her voice was soft, but clear enough for everyone to hear. He helped me. He kept me safe. He gave me water, and food, and warmth. Her words carried emotion not dramatic, but honest enough to show everything she had felt during her time at the ranch. The chief listened to his daughter's voice with deep attention. Then, he turned back to Jacob. "My name is Hakan," he said with calm authority. "I lead this band. Nayeli is my daughter. She is precious to our people." Jacob nodded respectfully. "I'm Jacob Turner. This is my ranch." Hakan gazed around slowly at the ranch, the barns, the open land, and then back at Jacob. "You took care of her with kindness. You did not have to." Jacob replied quietly, "I couldn't leave her." Hakan stepped closer, standing directly in front of him. Their eyes met not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two men who understood the value of life and duty. "You acted with honor," Hakan said. The words held weight, heavy, meaningful, powerful. Jacob didn't answer right away. He simply nodded once in acknowledgement. The chief continued, "Among our people, when someone saves another, it creates a bond. Not just with that person, but with their family, with their people. You have earned our respect. Among our respect." The warriors nodded again, some touching their fists lightly to their chests in a sign of acknowledgement. Nayeli's eyes softened, watching her father and Jacob with quiet gratitude. Hakan took a deep breath, then asked gently. Jacob stepped aside immediately. "Of course, she belongs with her family." Nayeli looked up at him, her eyes holding a mix of emotions, gratitude, sadness, and something like admiration. She didn't want to leave without expressing something important. She walked closer, standing in front of Jacob. She placed her hand over her heart again. The gesture she had shown the day before, this time stronger, clearer, full of meaning. Jacob bowed his head in return. A few warriors stepped forward to help Nayeli. They supported her gently, treating her with deep respect. As she walked past Jacob, she looked back one more time and whispered, "Thank you, Jacob." Her voice, though soft, felt warm and heartfelt, carrying everything she couldn't express in longer words. Hakan signaled to his warriors, and they guided Nayeli to a gentle horse. She climbed slowly onto it with their help. Once she was settled, Hakan mounted his own horse and looked at Jacob again. "You have a place among us," the chief said. "If ever you need help, speak my name." Jacob nodded. "Thank you." The warriors raised their hands in a silent gesture of respect before turning their horses around. The sound of hooves filled the night again, fading slowly as the group disappeared into the darkness. Jacob stood alone in the moonlight, watching them leave. The ranch felt strangely quiet without Nayeli's presence. Her absence left a gentle emptiness, not painful, but meaningful. He hoped she would recover fully. And he hoped this encounter would bring peace between their communities. As the stars shone above, Jacob realized the frontier had given him something unexpected, a connection between two worlds that rarely understood each other. And though he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he knew something had changed forever. The morning after Nayeli and her people left, Jacob woke earlier than usual. The ranch felt strangely quiet, without the soft rustle of blankets or the careful sound of her breathing in the barn. For 2 days, he had been watching over her, tending to her needs, listening to her quiet voice, and stepping gently so she wouldn't fear him. Now the barn was still, empty except for the blankets he had folded neatly and set aside. He walked inside, letting his hand rest briefly on the wooden beam where she had leaned while trying to stand. The memory felt fresh, warm, and clear. Her determination, her quiet bravery, her shy gratitude, all of it lingered in the air like a soft echo. Jacob took a deep breath, and stepped outside. He had work to do. Life on a ranch never paused. Not even for extraordinary moments. The cattle needed checking, the fence near the creek needed repairing, and Redwind, his loyal horse, nudged him impatiently, ready to start the day. But as Jacob worked, he kept thinking about Nayeli's father, Chief Hakan. The chief's words echoed in his mind. "You have a place among us." It was a rare thing. A powerful message of trust from a people who rarely opened themselves to outsiders. Jacob understood the weight of it more with each passing hour. By afternoon, Jacob rode across the pastures, letting Redwind trot at a steady pace. The wind felt gentle on his face, carrying the scent of dry grass and warm earth. Every once in a while, he glanced toward the distant hills where the Apache riders had disappeared the night before. He wondered how Nayeli was doing. Was she resting comfortably? Eating well? Smiling again? He hoped so. She deserved peace after everything she had endured. 2 days passed quietly. Jacob continued his routine, but something felt different inside him. A sense of anticipation he couldn't quite explain. Sometimes he caught himself looking toward the horizon, as if expecting something. Or someone. On the third morning, Jacob was fixing a broken fence post near the ranch entrance when he heard soft hoofbeats approaching. He straightened, dusted off his hands, and looked up the road. A single rider was coming toward him. The horse moved gracefully, and the rider sat tall and steady in the saddle. As the figure approached, Jacob noticed the familiar clothing and the long braid decorated with beads. It was Nayeli. His heart lifted quietly, not in a dramatic way, but in a gentle, warm surprise. She still rode with care, her posture a bit stiff, showing she was not yet fully recovered. But she was awake, alert, and carrying a small wrapped bundle in her hands. When she reached the ranch gate, she slowed her horse and gave Jacob a shy, soft smile. "Jacob," she greeted him, in her calm voice. He stepped forward, smiling back naturally. "Nayeli, you look stronger." She nodded. "I am better now." Then she added with a small laugh, "Still not fast with walking, but I try." Jacob chuckled softly. "That's good enough." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both remembering everything that had happened. The wind blew lightly, carrying the warmth of the day around them. Nayeli held out the bundle in her hands. "For you," she said. Jacob accepted it carefully. When he unwrapped the cloth, he found a beautifully made bracelet, crafted from small stones and beads, woven together with strong thread. The colors reflected the earth, sky, and sunlight, brown, blue, and gold. It wasn't something made in a hurry. It carried time, care, and meaning. Nayeli explained softly, "It is a gift from my mother. She made it for you. To thank you for helping me." Jacob felt touched deeper than he expected. He traced his fingers lightly over the beads. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. "Tell her thank you for me." "I will," Nayeli replied. She dismounted slowly, still moving with caution. Jacob offered his hand, and she accepted it, steadying herself as she touched the ground. They walked toward the barn together. Nayeli looked inside with a soft expression, seeing the place where she had recovered. "I remember everything here," she whispered. Jacob looked at her gently. Anyone would have helped. Nayeli shook her head lightly. "No, not anyone." Her honesty was simple, not bitter, just real. They talked quietly for a while. Nayeli told him how her father had punished those who wrongly accused her, not with harm, but with responsibility. They had been ordered to repair damage they caused, help the families they had troubled, and restore peace. Hakan had handled the situation with calm wisdom, avoiding conflict and choosing fairness. Jacob respected that deeply. She also shared that her people had held a small gathering when she returned, a gentle celebration that she was alive. Elders offered blessings, children brought her flowers, and her mother wept with relief. Nayeli spoke of it with warmth, showing how deeply she was loved. After they finished talking, Nayeli looked at Jacob with a mixture of affection and gratitude. "My father," she said quietly, "wishes to speak with you again." Jacob nodded. "I'll go if he wants me to." Nayeli smiled shyly. "He wants peace between our people. He says you are bridge." Jacob didn't consider himself anything so important, but he appreciated the chief's trust. "I'll help however I can." Nayeli turned toward her horse, preparing to leave. Before mounting, she looked back at Jacob with a calm expression that held something gentle, almost emotional. "You saved my life," she said softly. "My family will never forget. And I will never forget." Jacob felt the sincerity in her words. "I'm glad you're safe, Nayeli. That's all that matters." She placed her hand over her heart again, this time slower, deeper, and with a warmth that felt like sunlight. Jacob responded by bowing his head respectfully, knowing her gesture carried meaning beyond simple thanks. Nayeli climbed onto her horse, steady but careful. She held the reins loosely and looked at him one last time. "I will visit again," she promised. "You're always welcome here," Jacob replied. With a gentle kick, her horse moved forward. She rode along the dirt path, her small figure framed by the bright sky and golden land. Jacob watched until she disappeared beyond the ridge, leaving behind the soft sound of hoofbeats and the warmth of her presence. Days turned into weeks, and gradually people in nearby settlements learned what had happened, not through rumors, but through the Apache tribe themselves. Chief Hakan made it known that Jacob Turner was a friend of their people, that he was respected, that he had done a good deed, not for reward, but because of kindness. This news traveled quietly at first, then firmly. Settlers who once feared the Apache now spoke more gently. Apache riders who once avoided the ranch now passed near it with nods of respect. A bridge began forming between two communities that had long looked at each other with suspicion. Jacob did not seek praise or attention. He simply worked his land, cared for his animals, and lived his life. But he noticed the change. Neighbors approached him more often, asking questions about the tribe. Warriors sometimes waved from their horses as they rode nearby. A few even stopped to exchange greetings. And every few weeks, a familiar rider appeared on the horizon. Nayeli visited him again and again, sometimes bringing small gifts, sometimes simply sharing stories, sometimes offering help around the ranch, even when she was still regaining her strength. Each visit felt natural, warm, and easy. Jacob welcomed her every time. Their bond grew not rushed, not dramatic, but gently, like a tree growing roots after rain. A bond of trust, respect, and shared memories of a moment that had changed both their worlds. In time, Jacob's ranch became known as a place where settlers and Apache could speak peacefully, a place where differences were set aside, and simple humanity guided actions. All of it began with one morning, one act of kindness, and one girl who refused to let fear stop her from understanding someone unlike herself. And though the frontier remained a land of challenges and uncertainties, Jacob knew one thing clearly. Saving Nayeli had not just saved her life, it had created hope for everyone.